it's helpful to appreciate Dr. Safi's work as a public intellectual. He's able to combine the vision of Muhammad and Rumi, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and love and justice to speak up for the most marginalized peoples in the US and the world. And when it's often unpopular and could be a risk to his reputation and career. In my estimation, this is why his book, Radical Love, is more than mere words on a page or a collection of beautiful poems about mystical love set in a bygone era. He's able to connect divine love, radical love in the heart, to what Dr. Cornel West has said, justice is what love looks like in public. Regarding the title, Radical Love, why radical? Well, who wants to be moderately successful or create moderate change in the world? Who wants to love moderately or be loved moderately? In my view, we should each passionately devote ourselves to that which consumes us. But who or what is worthy of such devotion? Now I'd like to turn the evening over to a friend and someone that we're all eager to hear. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Omid Safi.
I think the good Lord figured that this world could only handle this much of me, and if there was more of me, that there would just be too much trouble. So it is an incredible honor to have this chance to be with you and to share these moments. I always take it as a spiritual, a moral, and an ethical pleasure whenever it is that we have a chance to share some time together. And for me, every opportunity to share words, share stories, and share teachings also comes with an extraordinary spiritual responsibility. And that responsibility is that inasmuch as is humanly possible for us, that we leave this evening, this time that we have together, kinder, gentler, more aware of our interconnected, interwoven lives, and rejuvenated. I was speaking with my very dear brother, Zachary, a little bit earlier. These are strange times. These are weird times. And indeed, we have been told that there would come strange days. I think those of us who know about prophetic wisdom and prophetic tradition know about some of these sayings, that in the beginning, Islam came as a stranger and it would return again as a stranger. There would come a time where the very heart teachings of our faith appear weird. That when you tell people that we come from a tradition that stands up for love and justice, tenderness and mercy, people look at you a little funny. They're like, well, I don't know which planet you've been coming from, Brother Omid, but certainly the circles that I've been going to, radical love has not been a frequent theme. Right? And that perhaps says a lot about how out of whack our world is. So, in some ways, I think we're called to be diverse. We are all already in this beautiful ocean of divine love. We are like fish that couldn't even survive outside of this love. And you hear all these wonderful linguistic expressions that ancient Arabs might have had 10 different words for different colors of dawn. And the Eskimos might have had 18 different words for snow. I'm willing to bet you that the fish don't have a word for ocean. Because the reality of the ocean so shapes their life that they can't even imagine something outside of it. There's only one condition that would lead them to know what it's like to live outside, and if it's somebody yanks them outside the ocean. Right? If you've ever seen somebody fish and they grab that fish out, some people fish for food, like many of us have enjoyed the wonderful, I think it's salmon, perhaps, dish. Or what is it? Chicken. There goes my analogy. Quick, can we change the fish metaphor to a chicken metaphor? Stay with me. Let's pretend like it was fish. I haven't had it yet. I look forward to having it in a little bit. Which I'm sure there's a Sufi wisdom in there about not pontificating on things that you have not tasted yourself. Yes. That's why the Sufis always said you have to have zawq, which is taste. It's one thing to have head knowledge, it's another thing to have tasted knowledge. But let's pretend this was salmon, right? Some people fish for food, and some people fish for sport, and you see them grab the fish out, and it flutters around the boat, and then they put it mercifully back into the water, right? It's only in that moment that the fish is out of the ocean that it has an experience of what it's like to live apart. There's some relevance to that about the way that many of us experience love today, particularly in these societies that we all now call home. And there's a strange irony about our experience of love. On one hand, you would be hard-pressed to find many movies, many popular songs that are not saturated with love. It's everywhere. And on the other hand, when you actually sit down with people away from their phones, we can do this. We're actually capable of having conversations face to face, heart to heart, eye to eye. And you ask them, not, how are you doing? But you ask them that most Muslim of questions. How is your heart? How is the state of your heart? Right? If you spoke Arabic, Persian, Turkish, Urdu, this was the question that we ask each other. حال شما چطوره? كيف حالكم? And the hal that we would be asking about is that transient state of the heart. We don't ask each other, how many things do you have to do today? What's on your to-do list? How many emails do you have in your inbox? The question that we used to ask each other, in this breath that you're taking right now, how is your heart doing? And the response could be, my heart is kind of tight. Alhamdulillah. My heart is in a state of expansion. Alhamdulillah. Or it's even some combination of the two. Alhamdulillah. I would love to have those kinds of conversations with people, where when you stop and you ask something about how each other's heart is doing, we actually learn something. I've talked about this and written about this. Most of the time what I hear from people is, oh, I'm just so busy. Like, this is not a game any of us want to be playing. Nobody's winning the busy game. Like, this is an Olympics in which we're all losers. There's no one whose tombstone is going to say, well, he lived a busy life. He was quite prompt at answering emails. If we could ask each other, how is your heart doing? And if we listened for the presence and the absence of love, what we would hear from a lot of us is, every movie that I watch is about love, half the songs on radio are about love, but somehow I feel like I'm missing love. I'm missing that kind of real love, fierce love, world transformative love, heart-shattering, heart-opening love. We sing about love, but where is this love? And many people would say, I really want to have this relationship with my parents. I want to have it with my children. And if we allow ourselves to go into that place of tenderness and vulnerability, oh, how many of us would describe personal lives, romantic lives, as being lacking in love, deficient in love, or even those hard to hear and harder to live words. People who describe their personal lives as loveless. The teachings of the tradition that we come from have a remedy, have a solution. These are the masters of love. These are people who have lived this love. They don't talk about chicken thinking that it's fish. They've eaten the chicken and they've eaten the fish and they know the difference. And what they have to tell us is that we are actually the fish in the ocean. There is such a superabundance of love all around us. But one of the reasons that we don't perceive it as such, particularly for those of us who've grown up in the modern West, is that we have taken all love, which is not even a whole rainbow, right? I mean, there's colors beyond the rainbow, and there's love beyond even that which we have names for, and we've collapsed all of it into this physical, romantic, sexual variety, which, let's be real, not a damn thing wrong with that. If you got it, good on you, honey. The Lord on high has blessed you. Get on your knees and say a million alhamdulillahs. And if your lot in life, or if your lot for this phase of your life has been to be without that particular shade of love, there's other loves. And that's the place that the path of radical love comes in. Because these masters of love lived it, knew it, and they had an extraordinary gift. 1,000 years before, there was Bob Marley. The Sufis knew that there is one love. One love. They were the ones who taught us, can you love your parents? That's love. Can you love a sibling, your sister, your brother? That's love. Can you love your child? That's love. Can you love something about your partner? We're not going to set the bar so high. Can you love them unconditionally? And they told you stories, right? When they told you the story of Jesus and the dead dog, right? This one is not in the Bible, but it was an oral tradition that shows up in the Muslim tradition. Jesus and the disciples are walking down the streets of the old city. Those of us who've lived in these old cities before the invention of cars, you know how narrow the streets are. And they come across the carcass of a dead, rotten dog. And the poet takes 3 lines to tell you how dead the dog is. I'll spare you since you're all eating, but there's information about maggots and intestine. Enough. Khalas. And the disciples do exactly what you expect them to do. They pull up the hem of their manly robes, they tiptoe around the dog, they hold their nose, and they're like, "Phew, this is disgusting, this is awful. The sanitation crew should come and take this thing away." And Jesus alone, Attar tells us, kneels down at the dead dog, places his hand on it, looks at it through the glance of love, and says, "MashaAllah," as a beautiful Muslim would have said, "MashaAllah, what beautiful white teeth this creature has. What beautiful white teeth this creature has." Now, why do these masters of love tell you the Jesus and the dead dog story? I'm fairly certain they don't tell it to you so that it changes the way that you interact with a dead dog in a narrow alleyway. They tell you that story so that next time your mother, your wife, your husband, your child, your boss gets in your face and they're turning red and they're shouting and yelling and screaming, rather than returning that, you can remember this story and you can say, Jesus had to look at a dead, rotten dog, and he found at least one thing about that miserable, dying, rotting creature that was beautiful. Is there something of Jesus in me? Can I find one quality? One. Not talking about loving them unconditionally, certainly not liking how they're behaving at the moment. In this breath, can I find one thing about this person that is not hateful? If you can do that, then that story has literally saved your life. Because the very same Sufis tell you, we have to listen to this and really take it seriously. They tell you there is no fire in hell. There is no fire in hellfire except for the fire that we generate. We are not sent to a place that has fire. We create the fire in which we burn right now. We are the creators of our own torment. And if you want a taste of that, think back, and may it be that you've never experienced this, but think back to the last really nasty fight that you had with somebody, and typically it wouldn't be somebody who just cut you off in traffic, right? That kind of fight usually comes with someone 1 degree separation from you. How do you physically experience it? A lot of us experience like this kind of heat that rises up, getting hot under the collar. The Sufis say that is a taste of hellfire. And if you can remember in that moment to do this, beautiful white teeth this person has. You break that cycle of returning fire for fire and burning in the fire that we are creating. They ask you these questions. We don't live loveless existences. Can you love your mother? Can you love your father? Can you love your child? Can you love a sibling? Can you love a friend? Can you love a neighbor? The question that the country that I call home right now, America, is really struggling with right now. Can you love a stranger? It's not just Islam that is coming back in a weird form. I live, at least some of the other friends in this room, live in parts of the country where the majority of the people call themselves Christian and would identify themselves as holding the Bible to be the literal, inerrant Word of God, yet they don't seem to have a mumbling word to say about separating babies from their parents at a border. They forget the part about be loving to the stranger, to the immigrant, to the refugee, because you yourself were once immigrants and refugees. So what the Sufis try to do is to get you to step back, and rather than having this narrow sense of love, it's got to be sexual and physical and romantic. I'm sure there's that one person meant out there for me in Mongolia. I mean, what kind of a dumbass strategy for happiness is this? That we tie our capacity to love from 7 billion people to 1, or to 2, or to 7. Instead of saying, every single human being that I come across is a mirror for the divine. I'm a fish in this ocean, and I find something of love everywhere. I'm very blessed this evening not only to have some friends that I'm still getting to know and hope to get to know better, such as the friends in the Hub Foundation, Zachary, Sam, and others. Some friends here that I've known for a while and some new friends. I'm also blessed to have my 2 beautiful daughters, Roya and Layla. These are great, great loves of my life. For a guy who has spent 30 years reading mystical love poetry, I thought I knew what love was. I knew it here. I didn't know it in my bones until they were born. And I still remember the first time that I held my first daughter. And when she opened up her eyes and she looked at me, her eyes hadn't yet, the pixels hadn't come in, it hadn't turned into this beautiful brown eyes that it is now. It was kind of grayish at birth. But she opened up her eyes and looked at me with those gray eyes, like something inside my heart melted. And I knew that I would never again be the same, because it was unconditional and immediate surrender. And also, for the first time in my life, there was fear. Right? Before that, I was like a child of Malcolm X. I was this radical activist who was going to save the planet. And I was like, you cannot touch my spirit. You can put my body in a prison, but you cannot touch my heart. But then when I had a baby, I was like, oh, if I'm away from my baby, yeah, that's terrifying. And what's really terrifying isn't something happening to me, it's something happening to them, and for me not to be able to protect them. But that kind of love came with a vulnerability that I hadn't known before. And I started praying, not for my safety, but for their well-being, with an earnestness that I'd never prayed before. And that happens every single night. So here comes the immigrant guilt trip. So when it's like 11:30 at night and my sweet baby girl hasn't come home yet, just imagine the tearful prayers that are going into. Okay, all right, we're done. And because God is infinite and divine love is infinite, if we don't see love as something that comes from us, as connecting with that source of love, then we too have access to infinite love. I have a beautiful son between these two. My son Amir, who's 15 years old. Gorgeous boy. Deep, dark, brown Persian eyes, curly brown hair. Some Persians have hair. You would be forgiven if all that you'd ever met would be Persian men. You would think that we all come into this world bald. No, some of us actually have hair for a while. And if you're a Persian man, young man sitting there laughing, time is a cruel source of revenge. I too used to laugh. When my son Amir was about to be born, and I know that we have at least one wonderful, beautiful mom here who's expecting birth pretty soon, I was actually terrified because I already knew what perfect love for my baby looked like. And my worry was, how can I possibly love somebody else? Like this poor kid. I've already given my whole heart to my baby. What do I have left to give to my son? When he was born, and I held him, he opened up his eyes and looked at me. The most extraordinary thing was that my heart expanded. This is what the Quran means by Alam nashrah laka sadrak. Didn't we expand your heart for you? Your heart can get bigger. Your capacity to love can and does grow. And it wasn't that I took my love and I gave half of it to my son and half of it to my daughter. It's that he made us capable of loving twice as much. And that's actually possible for us as we move through our existence. Imagine a kind of inshirah, a kind of expansion of the heart that comes out of these teachings. Let me switch a little bit and tell you a few of the stories and the poems that come out of this tradition that I've translated into the Radical Love book. And then we'll try to also make sure that we have some time left for some questions and some feedback. The story that I started the book with is one of my very, very favorite ones because it really shows love not only as what transforms our relationship with one another, but actually as what transforms our relationship with the divine. So Attar tells a wonderful story from an early mystic, Zulnun al-Misri, Zulnun the Egyptian, in which Zulnun has a dream of Judgment Day. And Zulnun says that in this dream I saw all the human beings who have ever been, who are, and who shall forever be, gathered in front of Allah. And we were all standing together, and we heard the voice of God come to us. Question after question. And the first question was, who here wishes to be rewarded with every worldly pleasure and delight that I have given you? Pretty good. So Attar says about 90% of the people put up their hands. Yep, we sure would like to have every worldly pleasure. And the voice of God comes to them immediately and saying, it is granted unto you. So they're pretty happy and they all leave. The voice of God comes to them a second time. Who here wishes to be free of all pain, free of all torment? No pain, no suffering, no fire will ever touch you. Who would like that? But of those who are left, about 90% like free from pain? No more disease, no more sickness, no more suffering, no more hellfire? Sounds pretty good, sign me up. 90% of those who are left put up their hands. Immediately the voice of God comes to them again. It is granted unto you. They do the happy dance and they leave. Third time around, the voice of God comes. Who here wishes to be rewarded by my loftiest paradise? A garden that no eye has ever seen and no words have ever described. That sounds great. About 90% of those who are left put up their hands, and the voice of God comes to them again. It too is granted unto you. And there's just like 5 or 6 people left. Up until now, the voice of God has always come gently. But this time, they experienced the voice of God like a thunder. I offered you the totality of all worldly pleasures, you took it not. I gave you freedom from pain, from torment and hellfire. You chose it not. I gave you a chance at my loftiest paradise. You took it not. What are you here for? And Attar says that these handful of people who are left put down their heads in humility and they say, we came for you. And then they hear the voice of God one last time with the utmost gentleness, saying, in that case, I am yours. We talk a lot about tradition. We talk a lot about what's traditional. This ain't some Bay Area 1960s groovy hippie. This is the stuff of our tradition from 1,000+ years ago. You don't get more traditional than this. And there have always been those who seek God above all pleasure, being free from pain, being spared hellfire, or even the promise of paradise. their relationship that they seek with God does not await Judgment Day and a world to come. It is a relationship of love here and now. And they talk about this with a tenderness and at times with a humor that is so gentle. One of them, when he's asked, how do you define this path of love? He says, با خدا راحت بودن. To be at ease with God. To be at ease with God. When you're reading their poetry, a lot of times they simply address God as Doost, friend. Friend. And there's a kind of banter that you would expect to find among friends. A lot of us have heard, of course, of the names of these great giants like Rumi and Hafez. Much less well known are some equal giants like Abul Hasan Kharaqani. Kharaqani is this simple lover of God. Attar has a lengthy chapter on him. Rumi loved him. Attar tells this wonderful story in which Kharaqani again has a dream. Dreams are serious stuff. You don't mess around with dreams. God appears to Kharaqani and says, you know, I think people are getting quite fond of you. Do you want me to go and tell people what a hypocrite you are? Do you want me to go and tell them every negative thought that has ever crossed your mind? Do you want me to expose you for the charlatan that you are? Who still experiences these desires and these negative emotions? And Kharaqani talks right back to God. My Lord, do you want me to go and tell people how passionately you are in love with every single creature that you have created? That you love humanity more than a mother loves her newborn child? And if I do you want me to tell them that you will never throw any of them into hellfire? How could you when you have made them and you made them through love? And if I tell them that, I'm willing to bet that a lot of them are going to stop praying and fasting. And Kharaqani says there was a long dramatic pause, and he heard the voice of God come back to him and say, I say nothing, you say nothing. Now, this is not a theological textbook on should you pray or fast. Right? This is the tender love whispers of a lover of God and the one whom he loves. Lovers can tease each other. There's a love language which we should never confuse with the language of theologians. And they teach us a lot of stories about the kind of humility that we should practice towards one another. What's the first rule that they offer for someone who wants to be serious about their spiritual growth? قضاوت نکن. Judge not. Which is such a hard lesson. Forget judging. Like, we are judge, jury, and executioner if we could. how easy it is. I'm not talking about hypothetical, like right here. How easy it is for us to be like, girlfriend, everything that I see in you, the way to hell, hellfire is coming your way fast. You will not stop go. You will not collect 200. Diving head first into hellfire you are. Judge not. Judge not, because you don't know. We never know the struggles that somebody else is going through. And these same love mystics tell you these kinds of stories. Wonderful story that you get in that beautiful text, which we should be reading as often as we read the Masnavi and as often as we read the Divan Hafiz, the Mantaroter of Attar, Conference of the Birds or Speech of the Birds. He says that at one point God sends a command to all the angels. It says, tonight there is only one devotee on the whole earth that is really praying out of the depth of her heart. The rest of it are doing gymnastics, the kind of namaz that you do when you're trying to fit it in the middle of the NBA playoff halftime game. Like the Warriors are in game 7, and you're going to make your prayer time fit during the halftime by any means necessary. So God is like, the rest of them are just mailing it in. There's one person left. I want the angels to go and bless this person. And the angels are like, all right, let's go find this person. They go to all the mosques. Don't find anyone who matches that. They go to all the churches. They go to all the synagogues. Don't find anybody who matches that description. So they come back to God. They're like, you sure there's one? Because we're not finding anybody. God is like, no, there is just one. Keep looking. And Attar says that the angels go back and they find this person. Persian, as you know, the pronouns don't have gender. I've liked to imagine this as being an old woman in a Hindu temple, is the way that it's described. She's bowing down in front of a Hindu idol. And the angels are confused. Like, well, she's very sincere, but this is a Hindu temple. So they come back to God and they're like, we think we found her, but we don't get it because she's a idol worshiper. She's doing it wrong. And the response that Attar puts in the mouth of God is, O nimidana, man midana. She doesn't know, but I know. But I know. There's this constant refrain that you get, that part of the reason why we don't judge is you never know what is in somebody else's heart. And what is in the heart takes precedent over the ritualistic proper observation, if that's done without the pure intention. Ideally, those two come together. How lovely would it be to have a proper prayer and a proper presence? But when Rumi is asked, what is the one thing that you need to have to make the prayers be valid? And he turns to his students and he asks them to guess. And one of them says, well, your wuzu, your ablutions have to be done properly. And one of them says, well, the land should not be stolen from orphans. One of them says, well, your Arabic should be recited in the most eloquent, proper diction. Those are all lovely things, but none of them, in and by themselves, is the most important. The thing that Rumi says is the most important is huzur, the presence of Allah in your heart. It's the presence of God that is the qualifying feature of this kind of prayer. In the interest of time, let me just read 2 or 3 little poems that I've translated here for you, and then maybe we will, with Zachary's permission, turn it over to you. This one, you can find many examples of this in Hafiz's poetry, but I also like the fact that you find many examples of this in Saadi, Attar, and Maulana also. Keep in mind that, and this is one of the challenges that you have as a translator, not only does the lovely Persian language not have gender, so you don't know if it's talking about a male beloved or a female beloved. We also don't have capital letters. So you don't know if it's, the minute that you put it in beloved with a capital B, i.e. God, you're sort of already allocating it to one particular manifestation. Why is that important? Never trust a preacher who says that they're wrapping up. No preacher ever wraps up. They only set you up for future sermons. If you haven't had a chance to study this magnificent text called Savaneh, the Savaneh of Ahmad Ghazali, the younger brother of the much more famous Abu Hamid Muhammad al-Ghazali. Abu Hamid gets so much dap. He has entire academies devoted to him. You can take Ghazali courses left and right. People call him the proof of Islam and what have you. The younger brother, Ahmad, who wrote the Book of Love? Ahmad wrote the Book of Love. He writes the first book on Ishq in the Persian language. And if you like Plato and Platonic dialogues, you will love this. If you like Shakespearean poetry, you will love this. It's a short, meditative text that you have to sit with every sentence. He starts out by praising God and the Prophet, and he says, one of my dear friends who is closer to me than my own brothers, دوستی عزیز که به نزدیک من به جای عزیزترین برادران است, he asked me to write him a few words on love so that when he feels like he can't really get to Ishq, he can read this book and it can inspire him. I said, okay. I wrote a few chapters for him on the reality of Ishq, on the states of the heart for Ishq, به شرط آنکه, on one condition, به شرط آنکه در او هیچ حواله نبود نه به خالق و نه به مخلوق. I told him that I would write him a book of love as long as he doesn't try to bifurcate love into either the love of God or the love of humanity. Because love is one. If you want to love God, you have to learn to love people. And if you can love people purely, the same love will lead you back to That's on page 1 of this book. And he goes on to talk about, people ask us about what our religion is. He says, our religion is a religion of ishq. It is a mazhab of ishq, the path of love, the school of love, the creed of love, the religion of love. I do recommend much more time to be spent with it. So if you're reading some of these poetry, and we know that Rumi prayed with Ahmad Ghazali's book. We know that he internalized this book. So when he's describing someone as a beautiful beloved, it could be his wife. How nice to be Mrs. Rumi. Every day you get another 20 poems for you. It could be his beloved teacher Shams. It could be the Prophet. It could be God. And in all likelihood, it's actually all of them simultaneously. He'll write you a poem of love as long as you don't bifurcate it. So you have to read this not. I don't get annoyed very often, but I get annoyed when people say, these are spiritual poems that are really meant for the love of Allah. Like, you missed the whole point. The whole point is you simultaneously love God and love humanity. Loving God is easy. What has God ever done to you other than make you, sustain you, nourish you, redeem you? It's these human beings that are hard. Loving people is challenging. But they say this is the only way that we're going to get purified. So, paradise will be exalted, they say. Fine wine, a beautiful beloved, they say. Here and now we are, intoxicated, my beloved in my arms. So it is now, as it shall be then. You can find 200 poems like this in Rumi, in Attar, in Hafez, in Sadi. No texts other than the Quran were copied more and commented on more in the eastern part of the Muslim world. To the extent that we have an Islam, it is the Quran, and then this kind of sensual, spiritual, mystical love poetry. If you want to generalize and stereotype, that's the stereotype that we should be going by. I'm going to end with 2 little poems. One of them because it's these days one of my very favorite Rumi poems, and one because I think it speaks to us about where we are as a human community. The first one is quite simple. It's called You and I. And if we could live like this, how would it absolutely transform our relationships with one another? It says, you and I have to live as if you and I never heard of a you and an I. You and I have to live as if you and I never heard of a you and an I. It's a powerful teaching to live every day, because not only is love an embarrassment for us. I won't make you do this because I want you to come back to this place. But think about when you look into the eyes of someone that you love, or someone that you're getting to love, and how long they can maintain an eye contact with you before they sort of like look away and they giggle uncomfortably. The Sufis understood that we're not actually born like this. I know we've had a few beautiful little babies in here. When babies come into this world and they open up their eyes and they stare into the depth of your heart, they don't look away. They will never blink. That love glance between a child and a mother, a child and a father, like there's some serious alchemy in that love glance. You get to experience this again in life, usually in those early stages of a romantic relationship. You find these annoyingly happy people who just sit in public spaces and love glance into each other's eyes. And they're just oblivious to the whole world, drowning into each other's eyes. It's a beautiful thing to see. And some people experience having found the teacher in life who glances at them with that same love glance, which is never intrusive, which is never uninvited. These are teachings that transform how we form a human community. We're living through, and rightly so, vastly overdue, a Me Too movement, where we're having all these conversations about when is touch a wanted touch, when is glance a wanted glance. Imagine being heirs to a tradition which for 1,000 years has talked about how do we look at each other? How do we love glance one another? How do we speak with one another? How do we listen to one another? And the one that, partially because I'm a man, partially because I'm a father, that I think about a lot these days, how do we touch one another? What would it be like if the only circumstances in which we touched one another was when the touch was wanted, invited, and tender, rather than something that sought to possess or grasp or claim? And these teachings have been lived, have been practiced, have been internalized by these beautiful masters, these great exemplars of love. This is actually your last poem, and there will be no more until the Q&A. And this one is called Amichte, which is mingling. It's about that sense of living this love and experiencing ishq not as an emotion, not as a feeling, but to really experience love as the eruption of God onto this realm. It's to live with the reality that it is love that brought you here. It is love that sustains you here. And if we can get over the egotistical parts of ourselves and genuinely love one another tenderly, selflessly, it's as if we are merging back into this cosmic current of love that's going to carry us back home. So this is the Amichte poem from Maulana. He says, "Look, love mingles with lovers. See, spirit mingling with the body. How long will you see life as this and that, good and bad. Look at how this and that are made. May you have a life, may we have lives in which our hearts, our glances, our touch, our words are mingled with this kind of a divine love. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you. Thank you for the gift of your time. And I would be very grateful for the chance to have a few minutes of Q&A with Zachary and with you. Thank you.
I'm curious, what's the relationship between radical love and radical unity, or tawheed? I think you allude to this when you speak of one love, but can you also talk about, this understanding of wahdatul wujud, and the idea that all of creation is in some sense a name or a sign of God?
Yeah. So some of these terms, like wahdatul wujud, the unity of being, these get very complicated, and you can spend 30 years, 40 years, 50 years of your life studying them, and you might feel like you have a little glimpse of them. Here's the little tiny bit that I have found spoken very clearly in these texts. And there's two simple points. One of them is tawheed is not about God. We really have to stop talking about tawheed as the translation for monotheism or the oneness of God. There's a wonderful line in the Bible that says, even the devils know that God is one and shudder. God is already one. The word tawheed in Arabic is about integration. It's about making one, making whole. It's oneing. You can't make God into one since God is already one. The thing that is in need of oneing, of being made whole, is us. We are the ones who are fragmented. We are the ones who are broken. We are the ones who are divided against our own selves. We are the ones in need of tawheed. How can we possibly have faith in the one God and be mirrors for the one God when we're like a mirror that has been broken into 1,000 pieces? So there has to be a process of healing. And healing happens through love. The good news, and I say this as somebody who has experienced, last count, 7 major catastrophic, apocalyptic heartbreaks in my own life, that I would never wish a single one of them on anyone else. But we're actually not created to be permanently broken-hearted. Our fitra, our divine nature, is to be whole. Being whole is natural. It is more natural to be healed and whole than it is to be broken. So how do we do this? How do we practice this path of love? The Sufis, unlike philosophers, whom they have very little patience for. I used to teach in the Department of Philosophy. I very rarely met happy philosophers. Met a lot of happy religious people. Most philosophers wear black and smoke and drink espresso. And I like espresso, and that's the extent of it. The Sufis say, here's how we practice tawheed, and we live this teaching of love. it starts with yourself. We have to learn to love our being. We have to learn what makes you who you are. For some of us, that actually starts with even loving your skin, loving your color, loving the texture of your hair. If you read Malcolm X, right? If you've listened to his speeches, who taught you to hate yourself? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin so that you would bleach yourself? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose? This is real. We can't love somebody else if we loathe ourselves. But when you've loved yourself, it overflows, because it's the nature of ishq to overflow. And love compels you to move outward. You love someone more than just yourself. So if you learn to love your child, and you learn to get up in the middle of the night because your baby has a poopy diaper, if you are sitting here tonight, you're alive because somebody loved you. Somebody decided in the middle of the night that your poopy ass diaper being cleaned is more important than the fact that they have not slept for 8 hours for years. That's the only reason you're alive. And here's the reason why Sufis are better than philosophers. In the middle of the night, you wake up because you're hungry, and you do the one thing that babies know how to do. You cry. You don't send a text message, you don't email, you don't rationally be like, I am in need of something. You cry out like somebody, God, mom, I think you're the same being. Feed me. And here's what the mom doesn't do. Let me make a chart of pros and cons. Here's the total amount of sleep that I have had in the last 2 months, and here's the total number of minutes that I think I'm willing to let this baby cry. We don't do a cost-benefit analysis when it comes to projecting ourselves in love and service to somebody. And if you're alive, it's because somebody reached out to you in love. Your survival is a testimony to the fact that you've been loved. I know a lot of us think that we live loveless lives. I'm telling you, you're alive because somebody loved you and somebody served you. So if you can move from loving yourself to loving a child, or recognizing that your mama or your baba loved on you, then you're moving beyond yourself, and that's good. But if you get stuck at the level of family, that's nepotism. You got to keep pushing. Let love spill over. And if you get as far as, well, I love everybody who looks just like me. If I'm Iranian, I love all Iranians, and that's it. Everybody else can go to hell in the handbasket. Well, congratulations. You're a certified racist? Nationalist? Ethnicist? I don't even know what the right term for it. If you say, I only love people who look like me, and my love ends at those imagined national borders. No, that love has to spill over. And it could spill over, and you could say, well, I'm going to love everybody who prays the same way that I do, who has faith in God or gods or goddesses the same way that I do. Good. You've maybe moved beyond being a nationalist or being a racist, and you've evolved to the level of being a religious bigot. Whoopee. That's progress. But love has to spill over and spill over. God feeds all. The sun shines on all. And if we want to have real love, fierce love, radical love, It has to look like that. So it's at the point in which we refuse to limit love. You love yourself, you love your family, you love your community, you love your nation, you love the people that you come from, the religious community that you come from, but you let it spill over so that it washes over the whole of humanity. I would even say every sentient being. That's Tawheed. That's oneness. That's that cosmic current of love that is God spilling over. Everything else is just being an accountant.
Thank you. One of the aspects of your book that I think most impresses me and serves as a corrective to our sort of modern Western understanding of Sufism is you put the teachings of radical love from the Quran, the Hadith, the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, alongside those of the Muslim mystics or Sufis, which generally, it's not done as often as it should be.
Yeah.
To show the sort of the origins. So may I ask you, what's the relationship between the hub, the love of early Islam, and the ishq of someone like Ahmad Ghazali and others?
That's a great question. So in the early part of the Sufi tradition, it was an ascetic tradition, a world-denying tradition. And look, it made sense. Here's what happened in the early Muslim community. I always like to remember this advice of have your heart be where your feet are, right? So where are our feet? What's the name of this little town that we're in? Pleasanton. And the population of Pleasanton would be?
Anyone?
76,000. Wow, that's pretty exact. If love comes to town, maybe it'll be 76,000 and a few new souls, but no. Take Pleasanton and divide it by 10. That's about the size of the city of the Prophet, Medina, at the time that the Prophet of God passes away. It has a population under 10,000 people. We're talking about a place, a fraction the size of Pleasanton. Now, in an age before electricity, before emails, phone, fax, gunpowder, tanks, bombs, airplanes. Imagine Pleasanton taking over an area larger than the United States of America in 100 years. That's what happened to the early Muslim community. And we went from people having a memory of the messenger of God sleeping on a bed of straws so that when he would wake up, he would have straw marks on his blessed side. To in 100 years, they've defeated the two superpowers of the world, and they're living quite literally and calling themselves Caesars. They're wearing robes of silk, palaces of marble and gold. And oh, by the way, those same people have also massacred the family of the Prophet. So the mystics are like, this whole worldly existence is messed up. We're going to retreat from this. Wealth is bad. Power is bad. Government is very, very, very bad. And maybe sexuality is bad. Maybe family life is kind of a distraction. So they're trying to save their soul. And the way that they know how to do it is to focus on the love of God. So it's these early Sufis who make this sharp distinction between divine love, and they don't even call it human love, they call it metaphorical love. The only thing that we can learn about the love of God by loving each other, it's like a metaphor. Once we've mastered the art of loving each other, we can get to real love, divine love. By Rumi's time, Muslims are in a very different place. They're quite confident that they can meet new challenges. It's actually a beautiful example. They've met and conquered every challenge that came their way. The most seductive knowledge in the world, Greek philosophy. They took it, they ate it up, to the point that Muslim philosophers didn't think of this as Greek knowledge. It was just knowledge. The philosophers didn't think, now I'm thinking in an Aristotelian fashion. They were just thinking, I'm thinking. So by Rumi's time, 400 years, 500 years down the road, there is a level of maturity and sophistication and confidence. So a lot of attitudes about the world and worldly relations had changed from how they were a few centuries before.
And the last question that I'll ask before I open it up to the audience, well, first suggest that it seems to me that sort of what ties your work together is this connection between love and justice. And you know, one might argue that this is sort of embodied by the concept of spiritual chivalry. And so I'd like you to speak a little bit more. You already have, but what, you know, how are we called to embody these ideals in the present in light of some of the challenges that we faced? How can we, you know, be more chivalrous, noble, kind, in light of, you know, racism, sexism, modern war?
I'm very mindful of the fact that some of these words have very negative resonances for some of us. So the word chivalry is very beautiful and noble to some, and irredeemably patriarchal to others. There's a few good things about getting older, like two. As a young man in my 20s and early 30s, I felt really adamant about the fact that some words were really better than others, and I kind of hung a lot of my life's work on those words. 50 is just around the corner, and a good day, as Arundhati Roy says, I can feel her coming. Inshallah, if it gets here. One of the things that has come is I'm much less concerned with particular words and a little bit more attached to their meaning and their reality. So if the term chivalry doesn't work for someone, fine. Let's focus on what the meaning is, and that sense of nobility, service, devotion, dedication to those who find themselves vulnerable, and if called upon, bravery in defending them without malice towards the particular perpetrators. You defend people, but you don't demonize people. You call out white supremacy and refuse the trap of thinking, as I might have done on a few occasions, that if I call Trump an orange Oompa Loompa, which I have, in print, that somehow is solving the problem. The problem was here before Trump, it will be here after Trump. We have to be a people of principles, not of personalities, that level. So I think what it comes down to for me is really sitting with the fact that why is it that in the Quran we get these mentions, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ. God commands you to the justice dimension and ihsan, which is that whole realm of love, beauty, and the spiritual life. Why is it that in the Quran, love and justice are linked up together? And here's the place, one of the places that I've benefited from, and I've been a student of, many people who've come out of the American freedom, black-led freedom movement, what we sometimes call the civil rights movement. Martin King, Vincent Harding, Ella Baker, Daniel Hamer, and the like. So Cornel West is the most eloquent voice of that today. He didn't invent it. But what they exemplified is, I think, where we have to be and where we are today. When we look at these teachings of love, when this love moves into the public arena, we call it justice. That's an eloquent statement, but the meaning is actually even lovelier. And here's what it means. I've had the benefit by now of traveling to about 40 countries around the world. Different food, different languages, different religions, different political systems, economic systems, architecture. The one thing that I've experienced to be true everywhere that I go, people love their babies. They love their babies. They want their best for their babies. They want their babies to have food in their belly, dignity in their bones, a roof over their head, and 99% of them want their babies to marry someone just like them. Universal truths. Justice means you love your own babies and you recognize that other people love their babies, and you would never allow something to happen to other people's babies that you would never want to happen to your own babies. That's what justice is. It's seeing love as this human, divine, global force. When it moves into public, we call it justice. Justice isn't simply about distribution of taxes. Justice is a work of love. It has to be rooted and grounded and anchored in love. And the teaching that one of these extraordinary Christian Sufis from the civil rights tradition, Vincent Harding, taught me, and this is one that I'm still sitting with today, when that same love moves outward into public, we call it justice. But when the same love moves inward, we call it tenderness. If you see yourself as someone who does the work of justice publicly, if you see yourself as someone who is devoted to the path of love, we have to learn to be tender with one another. There's no such thing as being a social justice warrior publicly and bulldozing the people in your family, bulldozing the people in your community. Being a devotee of justice and a love champion doesn't ring true unless we learn to be tender with one another. And that tenderness and that strength are actually deeply connected with one another. Some of the strongest people that we know are also extraordinary tender people. We have to get out of this outdated, absurdly masculine model of strength being defined through hardness. We need a new language. We need a new reality. And I think these teachings offer us a lot of that.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions from the audience? Abbas.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I loved reading your book. I just finished it a few hours before coming. So I got to finish this today. And thank you for your wonderful talk. The book and your talk and the poetry that you talk about, a lot of these poets are ancient. I'm not sure if any of them are living. Even some of the, for instance, Sufi culture that we experience through music are traditions that have been around for a very, very long time. We're living in an era, post-colonial, globalized culture, where English is, unfortunately, the dominant language. And, you know, as you mentioned before, a lot of beauty is lost in translating to English. My question is, who are the creatives or the lovers of today's era? I don't know if you know of specific people, but what does that Sufi tradition look like in the current globalized, I guess, English culture?
Thank you. So, you know, I'm guilty of many things in life, and being a little mischievous is one of them. So, to be a little mischievous, as we're taught in the good book, or one of the good books, of the friends of God, one should not say that they are dead. And I refuse to treat these people as if they are dead. They're not. Their bodies are under the ground, but love cannot die. And love teachings do not die. And so yes, there's that. The English language surely has a level of hegemony in the world today, perhaps unseen since the dominance of Arabic. Although I would argue English still has a ways to go to approach the domination that Arabic had as a lingua franca before there was the term lingua franca. Part of being a post-colonial person, and I don't call myself post-colonial because I don't see a lot of post, like we're living in the colonial. Like when Flint has brown water, I'm gonna violate my own rule, and that orange Oompa Loompa wants to print money for the Space Force, that's colonial. That's what colonial tastes like. It tastes like brown goopy water for our brown children. So I don't think we're in the post-colonial. I think we're in the new colonial. We're in the disguised colonial. And part of being post-colonial is to say we got to be suspicious of the hegemonies. So they're beautiful, brilliant, talented poets doing things in Urdu, in Persian, in Turkish, in so many different, in French. I want to make sure we're also shining a light on them. And the great American philosopher, Peter Parker, better known as Spider-Man, said, I think if people are familiar with Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. Actually, his uncle said that. So if we are living in the empire, and we are, and if we're privileged by being English-speaking people, then we do have the responsibility of making sure that our output matches the standards of poetry, of freshness, of meme-worthiness, so that it can reach people. So at that level, I would say, just as our ancestors embraced, critiqued, and internalized Greek philosophy, I would love to see us have a similarly intimate relationship with hip-hop, with spoken word, with memes, with images, with documentaries, with everything that speaks to people today, and to also know our place. And that's where collaborative projects come in. That's where group work comes in. This is not the time to be hopeless. it's actually a reason to be quite hopeful about the extraordinary work that's been done. The lovely woman sitting to your left is, I hope you don't mind me sharing, is a student of this extraordinary female spiritual teacher in Turkey who has hundreds of thousands of students. And she's doing things with the Quran and Ibn Arabi and Rumi that in 30 years of studying this stuff, I've never seen. And there's only one reason why she's not a global name among the Muslim community, is that 99% of what she does is in Turkish. So that's on us. It's not that these giants don't exist. It's that we're like, we want you to be as fluent in English as we are. Right? So some of that is like your responsibility and my responsibility to figure out whom do we put a microphone in front of. There's no such thing as voiceless people, and we have never been a voiceless people. There's only the people who are deliberately silenced and unheard. So.
Sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your speech and word of wisdoms. I have a major question, I think, as I listen to you, with the radical love. Opposite to radical love is radical hate. And this two, how could they, what's your prescription for facing the radical hate before we are all who believe in radical love or just love are herded to the concentration camp? So what's your proposal? Thank you.
So I think part of humility in answering such an important question would be in acknowledging that there's nothing that I could ever say in 3 minutes that would be the practical 5-step implementable plan to redeem the problem of the eruption of hatred and violence at a global scale. And as long as we're in agreement about what can and should be expected of a short answer, I think I would say 2 things. One, and one of them is going to be a little defiant and post-colonial and pushing back. The other one, I hope, comes from a place of spiritual concern as well. Elie Wiesel, who is an extraordinary voice of conscience everywhere except when he's talking about Palestinians and Iranians, 2 people that remarkably his luminous heart was extraordinarily shut against. But other than those, a luminous and wonderful writer very eloquently said that the opposite of love is not hatred, it is actually indifference. And I think that's a really important starting point. So much of what we see around the world is not the eruption of radical hatred. It is radical indifference, radical refusing to see the humanity and the suffering of our fellow human beings. At that level, I am as concerned and more concerned with the hundreds of millions of us who don't seem moved by extraordinary crises ranging from the destruction of the one planet that we have found to live on to the fact that in many of our societies, including the one that we call home, 20% of all of our babies, 40% of our black and brown babies go to bed hungry every night. That's radical indifference, and I think that is connected to a spiritual shortcoming. Martin Luther King used to call it an eye disease, a spiritual eye disease. It's this refusal of a spirit to even see the suffering of some. So I think there is that. As for, I think what more narrowly you're talking about, the radical forms of violence that we see, I think the only thing that I would have to say in a short amount of time is I would want to make sure that we're holding all forms of radical violence equally accountable. I've spent a good part of the last 20 years speaking out against groups like Al-Qaeda and Ansar ad-Din and the Taliban and the ever more monstrous permutations that seem to arise, certainly ISIS. With the same breath and with the same outrage and concern and love, I would also want us to always remember that by far the greatest purveyors of violence in our world are state governments. And we have set up this arbitrary division where terrorism is defined as the actions of non-state government. For the poor person living at home having bombs dropped on them, I don't think the fact that the person bombing them is wearing a uniform and is flying an airplane carrying the American or the Israeli flag makes a substantial amount of difference in how they bury their children. So I think it's very important for us, particularly for those of us living in the West, to be willing to say, absolutely, 100%, we should be standing up, acting up, mobilizing, and acting against groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. With the same breath and energy and outrage and passion and compassion, we should also be asking, why should the United States be far and away the greatest producer and seller of death machinery around our small planet? So I would want to raise both of those concerns.
Thank you so much, Ustad. It's been a real pleasure. I wish we could continue and ask more questions, but we've gone over our time. But there is an event tomorrow morning, and we'll try to leave more time for questions and answers then. So please join me again in thanking Dr. Omid Safi for joining.
Thank you.